何方妖孽，报上名来。
A friendly reminder, this is an extremely terrifying horror movie based on a real folk legend, and it's the darkest movie I've ever seen. You would never expect how terrifying human nature can be until the very end. There are rumors about a particularly terrifying creature in a certain nursing home. Although it looks human, it has a hunched body and a mouth full of sharp teeth. These creatures are accustomed to hunting at night and feed on human flesh and blood. If you catch its gaze, there's only one outcome: being skinned alive and drained of blood. As a result, the entire nursing home exudes a terrifying atmosphere. However, the existence of these creatures is known to very few outsiders. A high school student named Shou, however, accidentally finds himself at the nursing home with a bully trio, and what awaits them will be a tragic end. The story begins a little while ago. Due to Shou's top grades, he became the target of bullying by his classmates. After the teacher called Shou to the front of the class, his classmates started throwing paper balls at him. Even the class bully, Ren Hao, relentlessly taunted Shou with cruel words. Shou tried to endure his frustration and looked at the teacher, hoping she would intervene. But Ms. Li, who witnessed everything, gave Shou a venomous glare. The reason Shou became the object of ridicule was because the class funds had gone missing, and everyone suspected that Shou had stolen it. No matter how much Shou explained, his classmates ignored him, and even Ms. Li refused to believe him. As a result, Shou became more isolated in the class. With Ren Hao's constant provocation, the classroom was filled with insults and mockery. Listening to the laughter and insults, seeing the ugly face of Ren Hao, Shou became certain that Ren Hao had stolen the class funds and framed him for it. So after school, Shou secretly followed Ren Hao and confronted him, asking why Ren Hao had stolen the funds and framed him. But Ren Hao not only didn't answer, he started throwing the stolen money at Shou's face, then dragged him to the ground and strangled Shou with a rope. At the very end, Ren Hao even took a sharp needle and poked it towards Shou's eye. If Shou moved even a little, his eye would be permanently damaged. Facing such humiliation, Shou appeared to give in, but secretly recorded the incident and brought the audio to the office, hoping Ms. Li would help him deal with Ren Hao. But Ms. Li, as a teacher, not only refused to help, she said something completely outrageous. Ms. Li believed that Shou's introverted personality was the reason he was being excluded by his classmates. So she arranged for Shou to go to the nursing home to take care of the elderly with the 3 worst students in the class, in hopes of improving their relationships. What they didn't know was that this nursing home was the very place where the rumored creatures appeared. After arriving at the nursing home, Shou kindly fed the elderly. But as for Ren Hao, a social degenerate, don't expect him to actually care for the elderly. They not only pushed the elderly in their wheelchairs in circles, but also took photos recklessly. Their disgusting behavior nearly caused the elderly to collapse. In order to avoid being bullied by them, Shou quickly fell into line and joined their antics. But just messing with the elderly wasn't enough to satisfy Ren Hao's twisted desires. They also wanted to steal something. The group then went to a veteran's room, rummaging through everything. It didn't take long before they found a locked box. They guessed that there must be something valuable inside, so they decided to steal it under the cover of night. But as they cautiously walked back, they suddenly heard a strange noise. When they shined their flashlights ahead, the sight before them made their legs buckle in fear. Before them, 2 grotesque girls were crouched on the ground, gnawing on the body of an elderly person. The girls, startled by the noise, seemed to be frightened by something and fled in panic. Seeing this, the group no longer cared about the box. They ran desperately down the hallway. Just as they reached the door, they suddenly saw one of the girls being struck by a car and thrown into the air. Staring at the unconscious girl before them, they were filled with terror, hesitating whether or not to call the police. But in the next moment, the girl suddenly rose into the air and pounced on one of them, trying to drain his blood. In the nick of time, Ren Hao swung a shovel and knocked the girl unconscious, saving his companion. To avoid this incident reaching the police, they decided to take the girl to an abandoned warehouse. However, not long after, the girl suddenly woke up. It seemed as though her body was being controlled by some kind of force, and she stood up out of nowhere. In their terror, the girl's head twisted a full 180 degrees, scaring them out of their wits. But when the girl stretched one of her legs into the sunlight, she immediately screamed in pain, and this strange scene caught their attention. They figured that the girl was afraid of sunlight, so they quickly found a mirror to reflect the sunlight onto her face. The intense sunlight instantly caused the girl to writhe in agony. She struggled to climb down the wall and hurriedly hid inside a box. But Ren Hao, standing nearby, had no intention of letting the girl go. His malice only grew as the girl's screams intensified. In the end, he bound her to a stone pillar and began to torture her with every inhumane method imaginable. Then they brought a pair of pliers and heated them with a flamethrower. Two of them held the girl's mouth open, while Ren Hao inserted the pliers into her mouth and ripped out her teeth. The girl cried out in pain, but they just laughed uncontrollably. To prevent the girl from breaking free and attacking them, they sealed her mouth shut with a metal plate. Their cruelty was 10 times worse than that of demons. They also began to experiment on the girl, but neither Taoist magic nor the Bible seemed to have any effect on her. The only thing that worked was that when the girl's blood was exposed to sunlight, it ignited like a match. However, at that moment, they had no idea that the girl had a sister. Seeing her sister missing, the older monster began to search everywhere in the nursing home. However, she couldn't find her sister, and instead she barged into the veteran's room. A battle-hardened soldier, the veteran's fighting skills were naturally far beyond that of an ordinary person. When he saw the writhing monster on the wall, he quickly grabbed a large knife and struck, knocking her off the balcony. But the older monster didn't die. She twisted her body and stood up, continuing her search for her sister. What she didn't know was that her sister had already been bound to a pillar and tortured by a group of thugs to the point of barely being alive. Only Shou saw his past self in the girl, and he also knew that if he didn't join them, he would most likely end up tied to the pillar just like her. Perhaps due to their shared experiences, Shou decided to help the girl. So when he returned home, he began searching for recent missing persons reports, and finally found the girl's information. What Shou never expected was that these two seemingly beautiful and kind girls actually had parents who were sorcerers. They had been performing dark magic on their daughters for years, which led them to become neither human nor demon. As more and more curses were cast, the parents were eventually struck by a backlash and died, and the sisters became vampires, living off human flesh. Later, due to a conflict with Ren Hao and his classmates, Miss Li called him over for a scolding. During the conversation, Miss Li slapped Ren Hao across the face. That slap completely ignited Ren Hao's anger. But since this was school, even though he was furious, he didn't dare openly assault Ms. Li, so he vented all his anger on the girl. With each blow, the girl screamed in agony, her mouth dripping black blood. But when the blood touched the sunlight, it immediately caught fire. Watching this scene, a far more sinister idea began to form in Ren Hao's mind. When Ms. Li was absent, he secretly went to the office, opened her thermos, and poured a bottle of black blood into her water cup. When Ms. Li drank the blood, she immediately became weak, clutching her stomach in pain. A male teacher tried to help her up and leave, but the next moment, a large pool of black blood suddenly flowed from beneath Ms. Li. Everyone around was shocked. Ren Hao immediately approached and, pretending to be kind, offered to take Ms. Li to the infirmary. He even intentionally led her into the sunlight. Soon, Ms. Li's face started smoking, and her body was engulfed in flames. But the surrounding students, instead of panicking, casually pulled out their phones to take pictures. Ren Hao stood beside her, grinning with malicious satisfaction. In the end, they watched as Miss Li was burned to ashes. As the incident made headlines, the older monster, who was enjoying dinner nearby, naturally noticed Miss Li's unusual behavior. She immediately concluded that it was these high school students who had kidnapped her sister. In order to avenge her sister, the older monster stopped a school bus and slaughtered everyone on board, including Ren Hao's girlfriend. After hearing the news, Ren Hao was devastated. Furious, he went to the girl and not only ripped all of her teeth out, but drained her blood completely, leaving only her last breath to deal with the older monster. They decided to use the sister's blood to lure the older monster into a small, dark room, where they would lock the iron door and set the place on fire, burning the sisters alive. Naturally, the task of sealing the door was given to Shou, the easiest to manipulate. Although Shou didn't say anything on the surface, he was well aware that he was nothing more than a pawn in Ren Hao's game. Ren Hao, despite having done so many terrible things, could roam freely with his followers, while he, a kind person, was about to be devoured by the older monster. Thinking of this, the once kind Shou couldn't help but develop an evil thought in his heart. He was going to show these thugs the consequences of angering an honest man. Soon night fell, and the older monster followed the scent of her sister's blood to the small, dark room. The group hid in various places, waiting for the older monster to take the bait. But just as everyone held their breath, Shou suddenly dialed Wei Zhu's phone. Hearing the sound, the older monster instantly smelled her prey. Hiding in a metal barrel, Wei Zhu was soon ripped apart by the older monster. Wei Zhu's screams echoed through the night, startling the others. Ren Hao could never have imagined that Shou would betray him at this moment. He realized that this was his death sentence. He rushed toward the small dark room, hoping to escape. However, Shou was already there, blocking the door with his body. No matter how much Ren Hao pleaded, Shou refused to open the door. Soon, there was a tearing sound outside the door, and Ren Hao's movements gradually ceased. It was clear that he had been consumed by the older monster. Hearing the tearing sounds outside, Shou quickly realized that the older monster was in a frenzy. If this continued, he, too, would become the monster's next meal. In desperation, he ran to the girl, pleading for her to stop the older monster and not let her kill him. But the younger monster's limbs were chained, leaving her immobile, unable to stop her sister. Shou could only continue running and begging for mercy. In an instant, the older monster sent Shou flying with a single strike. As he saw himself about to be devoured by the older monster, Shou had no choice but to open a window and let the sunlight in. But this beam of sunlight fell directly onto the younger monster, causing her unbearable pain. Hearing her sister's screams, even though the older monster knew that she too would be burned alive by the sunlight, she still rushed forward, using her own body to shield her sister from the sun. But as the sun grew stronger, both sisters were eventually reduced to ashes. After the incident, Shou became the only survivor. However, the bullying he had endured did not stop. Ren Hao was dead, but there were still countless people like him at school, tormenting Shou at every moment. Now, Shou understood. The world was upside down. Good people had no place, while the evil ones ran wild. He felt nothing but disgust for this world and hatred for those who insulted him. So he poured the last bottle of black blood into the school's lunch. When the time came to eat, he even ate his own portion. Because Shou knew that the moment he added that blood to his classmates' meals, he had already lost his kindness and become a person of evil. He felt guilty for losing that kindness, and unsure of how to face himself from then on. The only choice left for him was to join his entire class in being burned to ashes. And that's the end of the story. See you next time.